The dusty stagecoach rattled into Jerome Junction, Arizona territory, carrying what might have been the biggest mistake of Clara Jensen's life. And she knew it the moment the wheels ground to a halt in front of the weathered wooden buildings that lined the single main street. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of every lie she had written in those carefully penned letters over the past 6 months pressing down on her shoulders like the unforgiving desert sun overhead. It was September 1882, and Clara had just traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, a cowboy named Henry Everett, who believed she was a proper lady skilled in all the domestic arts that frontier wives were expected to possess. The truth was considerably different. Clara could barely thread a needle without pricking her finger bloody, and the last time she had attempted to cook anything more complicated than toast, she had managed to set fire to her landlady's kitchen curtains in Boston. But desperate times had called for desperate measures, and when her father had died leaving nothing but gambling debts, Clara had found herself with exactly 3 options. Accept the unwanted advances of her father's creditor, a man 3 times her age with breath that smelled of rotting teeth and whiskey. Find work in one of the less reputable establishments that would hire a 22-year-old woman with no skills, or answer one of the advertisements in the matrimonial news. She had chosen what seemed like the least terrible option, though now, stepping down from the stagecoach onto the packed earth of Jerome Junction's Main Street, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of weathered buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. The mining operations in the nearby hills brought enough commerce to keep the place alive, but it was clear this was not Boston, not by any stretch of the imagination. "Miss Jensen," a voice called out, and Clara turned to see a man approaching. He was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that stuck out from under his worn hat. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work and eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. This was Henry Everett, her intended husband, and Clara felt her stomach drop even further. He was handsome. Terribly, devastatingly handsome in a rugged way that made her lies feel even worse. This man deserved better than a fraud who had misrepresented herself in every letter. "Mr. Everett," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she had intended. "Yes, I am Clara Jensen." Henry removed his hat, revealing more of that unruly hair, and offered her what seemed like a genuine smile. "Please call me Henry." "It is mighty good to finally meet you in person, Miss Jensen. Your letters, they really brightened up many a lonely evening out at the ranch." The ranch. Of course, he had a ranch. Which meant he would be expecting home-cooked meals and mended clothing and all the things a proper ranch wife should provide. Clara felt sweat that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat trickling down her spine. "Please call me Clara," she said, because it seemed like the polite thing to say, even though she felt like a complete imposter. "The journey was long, but I am glad to finally be here." That was partially true, at least. The journey had been exhausting, involving 3 different trains and finally the stagecoach, with stops at way stations where the food had been barely edible and the beds harder than the floor. But glad to be here. That remained to be seen. Henry reached for her carpetbag, and Clara let him take it, noticing the calluses on his hands and the way his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. He was a working man, that much was clear, and there was something honest about him that made Clara's deception feel like a stone in her chest. "I thought we could get you settled at the boarding house," Henry said as he gestured down the street. "Mrs. Palmer runs a respectable place, and I have already paid for a room for you until the wedding. I figured you might want a few days to rest up from your travels and, well, Make sure this is what you really want." Clara looked at him in surprise. In her limited experience with men, most would have rushed her straight to the altar, especially after corresponding for 6 months. "That is very considerate of you." "Well, this is a big decision," Henry said, leading her down the wooden boardwalk. "I know we have been writing, but letters are not the same as knowing a person face to face. I want you to be sure. And I want you to have a chance to see what Jerome Junction is like before you commit to staying here." The stone in Clara's chest grew heavier. He was being kind and gentlemanly, which only made what she had to tell him that much harder. But she could not let this continue. She could not marry this man under false pretenses. It would not be fair to either of them. "Henry," she began, then stopped as they reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked slightly more substantial than some of the other buildings. "There is something I need to tell you, something important." He paused, his hand on the door, and turned to look at her. Those storm-blue eyes were attentive, concerned. "All right. Do you want to talk out here or inside where it is cooler?" "Inside might be better," Clara admitted, because whatever happened next, she did not need the entire town witnessing it. The interior of the boarding house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Clara's eyes a moment to adjust. A plump woman with graying hair bustled out from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Miss Jensen," she said warmly. "I am Dorothy Palmer. Welcome to Jerome Junction. Your room is already upstairs, second door on the right." "Thank you," Clara said, though her mind was racing with how to tell Henry the truth. Should she do it now with Mrs. Palmer right there, or wait until they had more privacy? Henry seemed to sense her hesitation. "Mrs. Palmer, would it be possible for Miss Jensen and me to speak in the parlor for a moment? We have some things to discuss." Of course," Mrs. Palmer said, gesturing to a small room off the main hallway. "Take all the time you need. I will bring some lemonade. You both must be parched in this heat." The parlor was modestly furnished with a worn sofa and 2 chairs, but it was clean and the curtains blocked most of the harsh sunlight. Clara sat on the sofa, still clutching her reticule in her lap like it might save her from drowning. Henry took one of the chairs, setting his hat on his knee. "What did you want to tell me?" he asked gently, and there was no suspicion in his voice, just patience. Clara took a deep breath. There was no easy way to do this, so she might as well just say it. "In my letters to you, I may have exaggerated certain aspects of my domestic capabilities." Henry tilted his head slightly, waiting for her to continue. "By which I mean," Clara forced herself to go on, meeting his eyes because she owed him that much honesty. "I told you I was accomplished at cooking and sewing, and the truth is I am absolutely terrible at both. I can barely boil water without burning it, and the last time I tried to mend a shirt, I somehow made the hole bigger. I am not the accomplished homemaker you thought you were getting, and I am sorry. I should not have misrepresented myself in my letters, but I was desperate, and that is no excuse, I know, but I wanted you to hear the truth from me before we went any further with this arrangement." The words came out in a rush, and when she finally stopped, Clara felt both relieved and terrified. There, she had said it. Now Henry would probably send her back on the next stagecoach, and she would have to figure out some other way to survive, but at least she had been honest. Henry was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could not read the expression on his face. Then, to her complete shock, he started to laugh. Not a mean laugh, but genuine amusement that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look even younger than she had first thought. "Good," he said, once he had gotten control of himself. "Neither can I." Clara stared at him. "What?" "I cannot cook or sew either," Henry repeated, still smiling. Well, I can manage beans and bacon if I am careful about it, but anything more complicated than that and I am likely to poison myself. And sewing, he shook his head. I have been buying new shirts rather than trying to mend the old ones, because every time I try, I just end up with a tangled mess of thread and blood from stabbing myself with the needle. But in your letters, you said you were looking for a wife to help manage the household, Clara said, still trying to wrap her mind around this revelation. I was, Henry admitted, because that is what everyone says you are supposed to want in a wife, is it not? Someone who can cook and clean and sew and make everything nice and proper. But the truth is, Clara, I was not looking for a housekeeper. I was looking for a partner, someone to share my life with, someone who would not mind the fact that I am not much of a rancher either, truth be told. You are not. This conversation was not going at all the way Clara had imagined. Henry leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. I inherited the ranch from my uncle about a year ago. He was my mother's brother, never married, no children of his own. He left me his land and his cattle, and I have been trying to make a go of it, but honestly, I'm not very good at it. I grew up in St. Louis, worked as a clerk in my father's store. I know numbers and ledgers and how to order stock, but cattle, he shook his head. They are stubborn, ornery creatures, and I am pretty sure they know I have no idea what I am doing half the time. Clara felt a laugh bubbling up in her own chest now, a slightly hysterical sound born of relief and surprise. So, we are both frauds then? Apparently so, Henry agreed, and his smile was warm and made Clara feel something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. But maybe that is not such a bad thing. Maybe we can figure things out together. What do you say, Clara Jensen? You think you might want to give this a try anyway, knowing that I am not the competent rancher you probably thought I was? Before Clara could answer, Mrs. Palmer bustled in with a tray bearing 2 glasses of lemonade and a plate of cookies that looked homemade and delicious. Here you are, dears. I will leave you to your talk. As she left, Clara picked up one of the glasses and took a sip. The lemonade was perfectly balanced between tart and sweet, cold and refreshing. She thought about Henry's question, about this unexpected turn of events. In Boston, she had been facing a future that terrified her. Here, in this dusty frontier town, she was being offered something completely different, not the traditional arrangement she had been expecting, but maybe something better. A partnership with someone who was honest about his own shortcomings, someone who had laughed instead of getting angry when she confessed her deception. I would like that, Clara said finally, looking at Henry over the rim of her glass. I would like to try. The smile that broke across Henry's face was like sunrise over the desert, bright and full of promise. Good. That is real good, Clara. So, what do you say we take a few days like I planned? You can rest up, get to know the town a bit, and we can get to know each other for real this time. No more pretending to be something we are not. No more pretending, Clara agreed, and it felt like removing a heavy coat she had been wearing for far too long. That sounds perfect. Over the next few days, Clara discovered that Jerome Junction was indeed a small town, but it had a certain charm to it. The people were friendly, if curious about the newcomer who was going to marry Henry Everett. Mrs. Palmer proved to be a fountain of information about everyone and everything, delivered with a kind heart and no malice. Henry is a good man, she told Clara on the second morning, as they sat in the boarding house kitchen. Bit out of his depth with that ranch, but he works hard and he is honest. Those are qualities that matter more than knowing how to rope a steer. Clara was beginning to think Mrs. Palmer was right. She saw Henry every day, and each time she learned something new about him. He took her to see the ranch on the 3rd day, borrowing a wagon from the livery for the journey. The ranch was about 5 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley with rocky hills rising on either side. The house was small but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms and a main room that served as kitchen and living space combined. There was a barn that had seen better days, and several outbuildings in various states of repair. "It needs work," Henry admitted as they stood looking at the property. "A lot of work, and I will be honest with you, Clara, money is tighter than I would like. Uncle Robert left me the land and the cattle, but not much in the way of cash. I have been selling some cattle when I can, but I am not turning much profit yet." "How many cattle do you have?" Clara asked, watching a small herd grazing in the distance. "About 80 head right now," Henry said. "I sold some last month to pay for repairs to the barn roof, and hired a hand to help out, fellow named Joe Miller. He knows cattle better than I do, which is not saying much, but he has been patient about teaching me." "Where is he now?" "Gave him a few days off while I came to town to meet you," Henry explained. "Figured we might want some privacy when you first saw the place." Clara walked toward the house, and Henry followed. Up close, she could see that while the structure was sound, it definitely showed signs of a bachelor existence. The windows were dusty, the porch needed sweeping, and when Henry unlocked the door and they stepped inside, she saw dishes piled in the wash basin and dust coating most of the surfaces. "I know it is not much," Henry said, and she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But it could be nice, with some fixing up." Clara turned to look at him, this man who had been so unexpectedly honest with her, who had laughed when she confessed her deceptions instead of being angry. "Henry, I grew up in a 2-room apartment in Boston with my father. We had a hot plate for cooking and we shared a bathroom with 3 other families. This," she gestured around the room, "this is more space than I have ever had in my life, and it is ours, or it could be if we do this." "You really mean that?" Henry asked, and she could see hope dawning in his expression. "I really do," Clara said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it completely. "It needs cleaning, certainly, and probably some other work, but Henry, it has potential. We have potential." He crossed the room to her then, slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wanted to. But Clara did not move. When he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she could smell the soap he had used that morning mixed with leather and something else that was just him, he reached out and gently took her hand. "I know this is all moving kind of fast," he said softly. "And I know we are still getting to know each other. But Clara, I want you to know that I am committed to making this work, to being a good husband to you if you will have me. I might not know how to cook or sew or even ranch properly, but I will work hard. I will do my best to provide for you and to make you happy. That is a promise." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. No one had ever promised to try to make her happy before. Her father had loved her in his way, but he had been too busy chasing cards and dice to think much about her happiness. And the men she had encountered after his death had only been interested in what they could take from her. "I promise the same," she said, squeezing his hand. "I will work hard too. We will figure this out together." Henry smiled then, that same warm smile that made her stomach do strange flips, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was a simple gesture, old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Clara feel cherished in a way she had not experienced before. They spent another hour at the ranch, with Henry showing her around the property and pointing out what needed to be done. The list was long, but Clara found herself getting excited rather than discouraged. This was a project they could tackle together, a future they could build. When they returned to town that evening, Clara was dusty and tired but happier than she had been in months. Henry helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist, and for a moment they stood there in front of the boarding house, neither quite ready to say good night. "So," Henry said finally, "I was thinking if you are agreeable we could get married this Saturday. That gives us 3 more days to be sure, and it would give you time to find a dress or whatever else you need." The Reverend said he could perform the ceremony at the church, and afterward we could have a small gathering, nothing fancy, just some of the folks from town. Saturday. That was only 3 days away. It seemed both terrifyingly soon and not soon enough. Clara nodded slowly. "Saturday sounds good." "Yeah." Henry's face lit up. "You are sure? Because if you need more time, we can wait. I do not want to rush you into anything." "I am sure," Clara said, and she was. This might not be the conventional courtship, and they might not have all the traditional skills between them. But there was something right about this, about Henry, about the possibility of building a life together in this harsh but beautiful land. Saturday it is. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Palmer took Clara under her wing, helping her find fabric in town to make a simple but pretty dress for the wedding. Clara was honest about her sewing skills or lack thereof, but Mrs. Palmer just laughed and said she had been sewing for 40 years and could handle it. "Besides," the older woman said as she pinned the fabric, "sewing is not what makes a marriage work. Kindness does, patience does. And choosing each other day after day, even when things get hard. Those are the things that matter." Clara thought about those words often in the days leading up to the wedding. She saw Henry each day, sometimes just for a short visit, other times for longer periods. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He learned that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide and had taught herself to read when her father would not pay for proper schooling. "You taught yourself?" Henry asked, clearly impressed. "That is remarkable, Clara." "I wanted to read," she said simply, "so I figured out how. I would look at the newspapers people threw away, sound out the words, ask questions when I could. It took a while, but I got there." "That is the kind of determination that will make you a success at anything you put your mind to," Henry said, "including ranching if you want to learn it." "Do you think we can make it work?" Clara asked, voicing the fear that occasionally crept up on her in the quiet moments. "The ranch, I mean. Do you think we can actually make a go of it?" Henry considered the question seriously. "I think if we work together, we have a chance. I have been reading everything I can get my hands on about cattle ranching, and Joe has been teaching me practical things. And you are smart, Clara. I can tell that already. Between the two of us, I think we can figure it out. It might not be easy, but I think we can do it." Saturday morning dawned clear and hot, the way most days seemed to in Arizona territory. Clara woke early, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. Today she was getting married. Today her life was changing completely. Mrs. Palmer helped her into the dress they had made, a simple design in pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not fancy, but it was pretty and it fit well, and when Clara looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman who looked happy and hopeful, not desperate and afraid. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Palmer said, adjusting a small flower she had pinned in Clara's dark hair. "Henry is a lucky man." "I think I might be the lucky one," Clara admitted. "He is a good man, Mrs. Palmer, better than I expected to find." "The best ones are the ones who see you as a partner, not a servant," Mrs. Palmer said wisely. "And Henry, he sees you proper, I can tell." The church was small but well kept, with wooden pews that had been polished smooth by years of use. A surprising number of people had gathered for the ceremony, considering Clara had only been in town a few days. But Henry had lived here for over a year now, and apparently the community had taken to him. Henry was already there when Clara arrived, standing at the front of the church with the Reverend. He wore a new shirt, or at least one that looked newer than the ones Clara had seen him in before, and his hair had been freshly cut and combed. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face transformed with a smile so genuine and full of joy that Clara felt her own fears melting away. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. The ceremony itself was brief, the traditional words that had bound couples together for generations. When the Reverend asked Henry if he took Clara to be his wife, Henry's "I do" was firm and clear. And when it was Clara's turn, she found her own voice steady and sure. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend said. "Henry, you may kiss your bride." Henry stepped closer, his eyes searching Clara's face as if asking permission. She smiled and tilted her face up slightly, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers. It was a gentle kiss, soft and sweet, but Clara felt the promise in it, the beginning of something that could grow into deep and abiding love. The gathering afterward was held at the hotel's dining room, and the townspeople had brought food and drink to celebrate. Clara was introduced to so many people that she knew she would never remember all the names, but everyone was friendly and welcoming. Joe Miller, Henry's ranch hand, was there too, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Everett," he said, and Clara felt a little thrill at hearing her new name. "Henry has been talking about you non-stop for the past week." "I am glad you made it here safely." "Thank you," Clara said. "Henry tells me you have been teaching him about ranching." "Trying to," Joe said with a grin. "He is a quick learner, though, determined. That counts for a lot out here." As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself standing next to Henry, his arm casually around her waist, and she realized this felt natural. Right. They might have started this journey under false pretenses, but somewhere along the way, something real had begun to grow. When the sun started to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Henry leaned down to murmur in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Everett, home." The ranch. Their ranch now. Clara nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. This was her wedding night, after all, and while Henry had been nothing but respectful, they were married now. She was not entirely sure what to expect. The wagon ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The evening air was cooler than the day had been, and Clara was grateful for Henry's coat around her shoulders. When they arrived at the house, Henry helped her down from the wagon and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "I know I am supposed to carry you over the threshold," he said, a bit sheepishly. "Tradition and all that." Clara laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her through the door. The house was cleaner than it had been when she had first seen it. Someone, probably Henry, had obviously spent time sweeping and dusting and organizing. There were even fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Did you do all this?" Clara asked as Henry set her gently on her feet. "Most of it," he admitted. "Joe helped some." "We figured you deserved to come home to a clean house, at least." "Thank you," Clara said, touched by the gesture. "It looks wonderful." They stood there in the main room, suddenly awkward now that they were alone. Henry cleared his throat. "Clara, I just want you to know there is no pressure tonight, or any night really. We can take things as slow as you need to. I meant what I said about being partners. That includes making sure you are comfortable with everything." Clara felt her nervousness ease. She stepped closer to Henry, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her palm. "I appreciate that, but Henry, we are married, and I want this. I want us." He turned his head slightly to kiss her palm, then brought his hands up to cup her face. "I want us too. I have wanted you since the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking scared and determined all at once. This time when they kissed, it was deeper, more passionate. Clara felt heat building in her belly, her hands moving to Henry's shoulders, then his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palms. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her closer, and Clara went willingly, pressing herself against him. They made their way to the bedroom, helping each other out of clothing with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation and nervousness. In the dim light of the single lamp, Henry looked at Clara like she was something precious, something to be treasured, and when they came together, it was tender and awkward and perfect all at once. Afterward, lying in Henry's arms in the bed that was now theirs, Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known in a very long time. This strange journey, starting with desperate lies and unexpected honesty, had brought her to exactly where she needed to be. Clara. Henry's voice was soft in the darkness. Yes, I am really glad you came here, really glad you answered my advertisement. Clara smiled against his chest. So am I, even if neither of us is what the other expected. Especially because of that, Henry corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We get to figure out who we really are together. No pretending, just us. Just us, Clara agreed and let herself drift off to sleep, safe and warm and home. The next morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Henry moving around in the other room. She stretched, feeling pleasantly sore, and smiled at the memory of the night before. Getting out of bed, she dressed in one of her simple day dresses and went to see what her husband was up to. Henry was at the stove, frowning intently at a pan that contained what looked like it might have once been eggs, but now resembled something closer to rubber. He looked up when he heard her, and his expression was so comically dismayed that Clara could not help but laugh. I was trying to make breakfast, he said, but I think I might have ruined it. Clara came over to look at the pan. The eggs were definitely overcooked and there was a smell of something burning. Well, we did establish that neither of us can cook. We are going to starve, are we not? Henry said, but he was smiling. Not if I can help it, Clara said decisively. She had been thinking about this problem, actually. I might not know how to cook, but I can read, and I am very good at following instructions. Do you think we could get a cookbook in town? Henry's eyes lit up. That is brilliant. Why did I not think of that? We absolutely can get a cookbook. Several if you want them. And in the meantime, Clara said, looking at the ruined eggs, maybe we can manage bread and butter, and I saw some preserves in the cupboard. Now that I can handle, Henry said, clearly relieved. They sat at the table with their simple breakfast, and Clara felt ridiculously happy. This was her life now. This house, this man, this opportunity to build something from nothing. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. So what do we need to do today? Clara asked. With the ranch, I mean. Well, Joe will be back this afternoon, Henry said. We need to check on the cattle, make sure none have wandered off or gotten into trouble, and there is always something that needs mending or fixing. The list is never ending, honestly. Then we had better get started, Clara said practically. But first, I think we should go to town and get those cookbooks, and maybe some other supplies. I want to make this house into a proper home. They spent the morning making a list of everything they needed, which turned out to be quite extensive. When they headed into town after lunch, Clara was armed with several pages of notes and a determination to start her new life properly equipped. The general store in Jerome Junction was packed with all manner of goods, from tools to fabric to food staples. The proprietor, a man named Martin Shaw, greeted them warmly. Mr. and Mrs. Everett, congratulations again on your marriage. What can I help you folks with today? We need quite a few things, Henry said, pulling out Clara's list. Starting with cookbooks. Do you have any? Martin's eyebrows rose. Cookbooks? Let me see. He disappeared into the back of the store and emerged a few minutes later with 2 worn volumes. Got these from a widow lady who was moving back east. One is general cooking, the other is specifically for ranch cooking. Lots of recipes for using what you can grow or raise yourself. Clara took the books eagerly, flipping through the pages. The recipes had instructions, measurements, everything she would need to teach herself how to cook properly. These are perfect. We will take both. They spent over an hour in the store, gathering supplies and staples. Clara picked out fabric to make curtains for the house, and some seeds to start a kitchen garden if it was not too late in the season. Henry bought tools and materials for repairs around the ranch. By the time they loaded everything into the wagon, they had spent a significant amount of money, but Clara felt it was an investment in their future. On the way back to the ranch, Henry was quieter than usual. Clara glanced at him, noticing the slight furrow between his brows. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Just thinking about money," Henry admitted. "We spent a lot today. Not that we did not need those things, we did, but I am aware that funds are limited and I want to make sure I can provide for you properly." "Henry, we are partners, remember?" Clara said firmly. "That means we are in this together, including the finances." "How much money do we actually have?" Henry told her, and Clara did some quick mental arithmetic. It was not a lot, but it was not nothing either. "And when do you sell cattle next?" "Usually in the fall, before winter sets in." "I can get a better price if I wait another month or so, let them put on a bit more weight." "Then that is what we will do," Clara said. "In the meantime, we economize where we can. I can make most of our clothes if you teach me how to use the sewing machine better." She had noticed the machine in the house, clearly unused. "And once I learn to cook, we will save money by not having to buy prepared food." "You make it sound simple," Henry said, but he looked less worried. "It is simple," Clara insisted. "Not easy, maybe, but simple. We work hard, we are smart about our money, and we support each other. We can do this, Henry. I know we can." When they got back to the ranch, Joe Miller was there, and he helped them unload the wagon. He noticed the cookbooks and grinned. "About time someone around here learned to cook," he said. "I have been living on beans and bacon for too long. If you can figure out how to make anything else edible, Mrs. Everett, I will be your devoted servant." "No pressure then," Clara said dryly, but she smiled. She liked Joe. He had a straightforward manner that was refreshing. That evening, Clara sat at the table with one of the cookbooks open in front of her, studying the recipes like they were a foreign language she was determined to master. Henry sat across from her, mending a bridle with much cursing and several pricked fingers. "This is ridiculous," he muttered after the third time he stabbed himself. "How do people do this?" "Very carefully, apparently," Clara said, not looking up from her book. "I think tomorrow I will try making biscuits. The recipe looks straightforward enough." "Famous last words," Henry said, but he was smiling. The next morning, Clara approached the task of making biscuits with the same determination she had brought to teaching herself to read. She measured carefully, followed the instructions exactly, and tried not to panic when the dough seemed too sticky, then too dry, then too sticky again. Henry watched from a safe distance, ready to help if needed but wisely staying out of her way. When Clara finally got the biscuits into the oven, she sat down at the table, flour dusting her hair and dress, and waited anxiously. The smell that eventually filled the kitchen was promising. When Clara pulled the biscuits out, they were not perfect, a bit lopsided, and some were darker than others, but they looked like actual biscuits. "Try one," she said nervously, offering the plate to Henry. He took one, broke it open, and bit into it. His eyes widened. "Clara, this is good." "Really good?" "Really." She grabbed one for herself, biting into it skeptically. It was good. A little dense maybe, but it tasted like a biscuit should taste. "I did it." I actually did it." Henry laughed and pulled her into a hug, not caring about the flour that transferred from her dress to his shirt. "You did. I am so proud of you." It was a small victory, just biscuits, but it felt enormous. Clara had learned something new, mastered something she had never been able to do before. And if she could do this, she could learn other things too. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into learning everything she could about cooking and running a household. She had failures, certainly. There was the incident with the burned stew that they ended up feeding to the pigs, and the bread that came out of the oven hard as a rock, but there were successes too. She learned to make decent coffee and then good coffee. She figured out how to fry eggs without turning them to rubber. She made her first edible pot roast, and the look of genuine delight on Henry's face made all the failed attempts worthwhile. Henry, meanwhile, was learning more about ranching with Joe's patient instruction. He learned to rope, though he was not very good at it yet. He learned the signs of sick cattle and how to treat common ailments. He learned to ride better, to read the weather, to think like a rancher instead of a city clerk. In the evenings, they would sit together and share what they had learned that day. Clara might describe her attempt at making pie crust, while Henry would talk about moving cattle from one pasture to another. They were building their knowledge together, piece by piece. One evening about a month after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Henry took Clara's hand. "You know, I have been thinking," he said. "When I first inherited this place, I was overwhelmed. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was afraid I was going to fail, afraid I would lose everything Uncle Robert had built." "And now?" Clara asked, lacing her fingers through his. "Now I feel like we might actually make this work, not just survive, but really build something good here. And that is because of you, Clara, because you jumped in and started learning and never complained about how hard it is." "It is hard," Clara admitted, "but it is good hard, if that makes sense. I am building something, Henry. We are building something. I never had that in Boston. I was just existing day to day, never getting anywhere. Here, I can see the results of my work. I can see us getting better, stronger. Partners," Henry said, echoing the word they had used so often. "Partners," Clara agreed, and leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. But life on a ranch was never easy for long. In October, just when Clara was beginning to feel confident in her abilities, disaster struck. Henry came back from checking the cattle one afternoon, his face grim. "What is wrong?" Clara asked immediately, seeing his expression. "Some of the cattle are sick," Henry said. "Joe thinks it might be blackleg. If it is, and if it spreads, we could lose a significant portion of the herd." Clara felt her stomach drop. She had learned enough about ranching by now to know that losing cattle meant losing their income, their livelihood. "What can we do?" "Joe has gone to get the veterinarian from the next town over," Henry said. "But that is going to cost money we do not really have to spare. And even then, there is no guarantee we can save them all." For the next 3 days, their world narrowed to caring for sick cattle. The veterinarian, Dr. Harris, confirmed Joe's diagnosis and provided medicine, but administering it to frightened, sick animals was exhausting work. Clara helped where she could, learning to handle cattle out of necessity, getting kicked and stepped on and covered in mud and worse. At night, she and Henry would collapse into bed, too tired to do more than hold each other for comfort. The fear of losing everything they had been working for hung over them like a storm cloud. But slowly, gradually, the medicine worked. The sick cattle began to recover. A few were lost, which hurt both financially and emotionally, but the majority of the herd survived. When Dr. Harris finally declared that the worst was over, Clara felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in days. "You folks did good work," Dr. Harris said as he prepared to leave. "A lot of ranchers would have lost more cattle than you did. You caught it early and acted fast." After he left, Henry tallied up the costs. Between the veterinarian's fee and the medicine and the cattle they had lost, they had taken a significant financial hit. Henry sat at the table, staring at the numbers, and Clara could see the worry in every line of his body. She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "We will be all right," she said firmly. "We still have most of the herd. We can sell them as planned and recoup some of our losses." "What if it is not enough?" Henry asked quietly. "What if I cannot make this work, Clara? What if I am just not cut out for this?" Clara came around to face him, taking his face in her hands. "Henry Everett, listen to me. You have worked harder in the past month than most men work in a year. You have learned and grown and refused to give up even when things got difficult. You are exactly cut out for this. We both are. Yes, we took a hit. Yes, it is going to be tight for a while, but we have each other and we have this land and we have the knowledge we have gained. That is enough. We are enough." Henry looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw the moment when he decided to believe her. He pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," he murmured into her hair. "You were honest," Clara said simply. "You gave me a chance when you could have sent me back on the first stagecoach. That is what you did." They sat there for a long time, taking comfort in each other's presence. Then Henry straightened his shoulders. "All right. So we need to sell the cattle soon. Joe says we can get them to the railhead in about a week if we push it. It will be a hard drive, but the sooner we get them sold, the sooner we can pay our debts and start planning for winter." "Then that is what we will do," Clara said. "Do you want me to come with you?" Henry looked surprised. "On the cattle drive, Clara, it is hard work. We will be sleeping on the ground, dealing with the cattle day and night." "I am your partner," Clara reminded him. "Where you go, I go, unless you do not want me there." "I always want you with me," Henry said immediately. "But I want you to be sure. This is not going to be comfortable." "I am sure," Clara said. "Besides, I can cook now, remember. You will need someone to feed you and Joe along the way." Henry smiled at that. "All right then. We leave in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare." The cattle drive was every bit as difficult as Henry had warned. They set out before dawn, Clara riding in the wagon with the supplies while Henry and Joe herded the cattle. The days were long and dusty, and the nights were cold now that autumn was settling in. But Clara found she did not mind as much as she might have expected. There was something satisfying about cooking over an open fire, about falling asleep under more stars than she had ever seen in Boston, about waking up to the sound of cattle lowing and the desert coming to life in the soft pre-dawn light. This was her life now, and she embraced it fully. On the 4th day, they encountered trouble. A group of 3 men on horseback appeared from behind a rocky outcrop, and Clara felt Henry tense immediately. Joe positioned himself protectively near the wagon where Clara sat. "Afternoon," one of the men called out. He was older, with a scar running down his cheek and eyes that assessed them coldly. "That is a nice herd you have got there." "We are not looking for trouble," Henry said evenly, "just taking our cattle to market." "Well, that is the thing," Scarface said. "My associates and I, we have been thinking this area could use a toll road, and you are using our road." "This is open range," Henry said, his voice hard now. "There is no toll road." "There is now," one of the other men said, and Clara saw he had his hand resting on his gun. Her heart was pounding, but she tried to keep her face calm. She remembered Henry had a rifle in the wagon, within her reach if she was careful. Joe was armed too, she knew. But 3 against 2 were not good odds, and if shooting started, people could die. How much? Clara called out before the situation could escalate further. The men turned their attention to her, and Scarface smiled unpleasantly. "Well now, that depends. What do you have to offer?" "We have some money," Clara said, even though every dollar counted right now. "Not much, but enough to make it worth your while to let us pass peacefully." "Clara," Henry said, his voice low with warning, but she ignored him. "How much?" she repeated to the men. Scarface named a figure that was outrageous, clearly testing to see how desperate they were. Clara countered with a lower number, still more than they could afford to lose but not completely ruinous. To her surprise, the men actually considered it. "Throw in some of those supplies you have got in the wagon," Scarface finally said. "Food and such. Then we have got a deal." Clara thought quickly. She could spare some of their supplies without leaving them unable to complete the journey. "Half our coffee, some flour and bacon, that is all." The men conferred in low voices, then nodded. "Deal, but we take the money first." Clara climbed down from the wagon slowly, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was. But she walked over to Henry, took the money they had set aside for expenses, and counted out the agreed amount. Henry looked like he wanted to protest, but he stayed silent, trusting her judgment. She handed the money to Scarface, then went back to the wagon to gather the food supplies. Her hands did not shake, which surprised her. When everything was handed over, the men pocketed the money and supplies and rode off without another word. As soon as they were out of sight, Henry came over to Clara, his face tight with worry and anger. "Are you all right? They could have hurt you." "But they did not," Clara said, though now that the danger had passed, she was starting to feel shaky. "And we kept our cattle and our lives. The money and supplies, we can replace those. We could not replace each other." Henry pulled her into a fierce hug. "You were so brave. Foolish, maybe, but brave. I thought my heart was going to stop when you climbed down from that wagon." "Mine too," Clara admitted. "But I knew if shooting started, someone was going to die. Probably you or Joe, and I could not let that happen. This way, everyone stays alive and we can still get the cattle to market." "She is right," Joe said, coming over to them. "Lot of men would have tried to fight." "That took wisdom, Mrs. Everett, seeing the bigger picture. You might have saved our lives." They continued the drive, more alert now for potential trouble. But they encountered no more bandits, and 5 days after setting out, they reached the railhead town of Mesa Springs. The cattle buyer looked over their herd, and after some negotiation, offered them a price that was fair, if not generous. When Henry had the money in hand, he immediately set aside what they owed for debts back home, then looked at what remained. It was not much, but it was enough to get them through the winter if they were careful. "We did it," he said to Clara that night as they sat in a hotel room, an unexpected luxury after days of sleeping on the ground. "We actually did it. Raised cattle, survived an illness outbreak, drove them to market and sold them. We are real ranchers now." Clara smiled, leaning against him tiredly. "I suppose we are. Who would have thought it?" "Not me, that is for certain," Henry said. "When I first arrived at Uncle Robert's ranch, I thought I was going to fail within a month. But here we are, months later, and we are making it work." "Because we are doing it together," Clara said. "I do not think either of us could have done this alone." "No," Henry agreed. "But together, I think we can do anything." They returned to the ranch to find everything as they had left it, secure and waiting for them. Winter came on gradually, bringing cold nights and occasional dust storms. Clara spent those months continuing to improve her cooking and learning to use the sewing machine properly. She made new curtains for the windows, mended all of Henry's old shirts that had been sitting in a pile, and even attempted to make a quilt. Henry worked on repairs around the ranch, winterizing everything and making plans for the spring. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. The physical intimacy between them had grown and deepened, and Clara found herself falling more in love with her husband every day. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside their windows, Clara realized she had not had her monthly courses in quite some time. She counted back carefully and felt her heart skip. She might be pregnant. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She waited another week to be sure before telling Henry. She chose her moment carefully after a particularly good dinner she had prepared, when he was relaxed and content. "Henry," she said, "I need to tell you something. I think I might be expecting a baby." Henry went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully and looked at her with wonder in his eyes. "Truly, we are going to have a child, I think so," Clara said. "I am fairly certain anyway. We should probably get Dr. Harris to confirm it, but all the signs are there." Henry got up and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking both her hands. "Clara, that is wonderful, amazing. Are you happy about it? Are you scared? How are you feeling?" "All of those things," Clara admitted. "I am happy because it is our child. Scared because I have never been a mother before and I am not sure I know how, and I feel fine physically, just a bit tired sometimes." "We will figure it out," Henry said, echoing the words that had become their motto. "Just like we figured out ranching and cooking and everything else, together." Clara laughed, some of her nervousness easing. "Just like everything else. Though I am fairly certain a baby will be more challenging than learning to make biscuits." "Probably," Henry agreed, "but also more rewarding. Clara, we are going to be parents. That is incredible." The winter passed slowly, with Clara's pregnancy progressing steadily. She continued to work around the ranch, though Henry and Joe conspired to keep her from doing anything too strenuous. In February, Dr. Harris made the trip out to confirm the pregnancy and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "The child should arrive in late May or early June," he told them. "Make sure your wife gets plenty of rest and good food, and send for me when her time comes." As spring arrived and brought new life to the desert, Clara felt her own body changing and growing. She made tiny clothes for the baby, her sewing skills finally improving out of sheer determination. Henry built a cradle, working on it every evening with painstaking care, sanding every surface smooth so there would be no splinters to harm their child. In late May, as the desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers after spring rains, Clara's labor began. Henry sent Joe racing to town to fetch Dr. Harris while he stayed with Clara, holding her hand and wiping her brow and feeling completely helpless. "I do not know how to help you," he said desperately as Clara gasped through another contraction. "Just stay with me," Clara panted. "That is all I need. Just stay." So Henry stayed, and hours later, when Dr. Harris finally arrived, the delivery progressed quickly. Just before dawn, as the sky was lightening to pale gold, their son was born, crying lustily and unmistakably healthy. "A boy," Dr. Harris announced, placing the bundled infant in Clara's arms. "A fine, strong boy. Congratulations." Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love unlike anything she had ever experienced flood through her. This was her child, hers and Henry's, a life they had created together. "He is perfect," Henry whispered, leaning over them both, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Absolutely perfect. Clara, you are amazing. Look what you did. Look what we made." They named him Robert, after Henry's uncle who had given them this opportunity, this land, this life. Robert Henry Everett, who had his mother's dark hair and his father's storm blue eyes, and who would grow up knowing nothing but love and the wild beauty of the Arizona desert. The first few months with a newborn were exhausting in ways Clara had not anticipated. Robert was a good baby, generally happy, but he still needed constant care. Clara found herself more tired than she had been even during the cattle drive, but it was a good tiredness, earned by caring for her child. Henry was a devoted father from the start. He would walk Robert around the house in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, singing off-key lullabies and telling him stories about growing up in St. Louis. He changed diapers without complaining and learned to soothe Robert's cries almost as well as Clara could. "You are a natural at this," Clara told him one evening as she watched him rock their son to sleep. "I do not know about that," Henry said, "but I am trying. I want him to know I love him, even when he is too little to understand the words." "He knows," Clara assured him. "Look how he settles when you hold him. He knows his father loves him." As Robert grew, thriving in the clear desert air, Clara and Henry continued to build their life together. That fall, the cattle they had kept back for breeding produced healthy calves, increasing their herd size. Henry had learned enough that he was now making most of the ranching decisions himself, with Joe as advisor rather than teacher. Clara had become a genuinely good cook, able to produce meals that were not just edible but actually delicious. She had also started selling eggs and butter to people in town, bringing in a small but steady additional income. The ranch was not making them wealthy, but it was supporting them comfortably, and they were building equity steadily. One afternoon in late autumn, as Robert napped and Clara was working on mending a pile of Henry's work shirts, a visitor arrived at the ranch. It was Mrs. Palmer from the boarding house, driving her own wagon. "Mrs. Palmer," Clara exclaimed, delighted to see the older woman. "What brings you all the way out here?" "I wanted to see how you were doing," Mrs. Palmer said, climbing down from the wagon with a basket over her arm, "and to bring you some things. I made extra preserves this year and thought you might like some." They sat on the porch, drinking tea and watching Robert play with wooden blocks Henry had carved for him. Mrs. Palmer asked about the ranch, about Clara's life, and Clara found herself telling the truth, the whole truth, in a way she had not with many people. "It is not what I expected when I answered that advertisement," Clara said. "It has been harder and better all at once, but I am happy, Mrs. Palmer, truly happy. Happier than I ever thought I could be." "That is all anyone can ask for," Mrs. Palmer said, patting Clara's hand. "You have made a good life here, you and Henry. I can see it in how you talk about him, about this place. You have found where you belong." After Mrs. Palmer left, Clara thought about those words, where she belonged. A year and a half ago, she had been desperate and alone in Boston, with no clear future and no real hope. Now she had a husband she loved, a beautiful son, a home she had helped build. She had found skills she had not known she possessed and strength she had not known she had. That evening, as she and Henry sat on the porch watching the sunset, Robert contentedly playing between them, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. "You ever think about how different our lives would be if I had been the cook and seamstress you thought you were getting?" Clara asked. Henry considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but honestly, I think things worked out the way they were supposed to. If you had been that perfect domestic angel, I might not have felt like I could be honest about my own shortcomings. We might have fallen into traditional roles and never become the partners we are now." "So you are saying my inability to cook saved our marriage before it even started?" Clara teased. "Something like that," Henry agreed, grinning. "Though I do appreciate that you eventually learned." "That burned stew was truly terrible," Clara laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "You are lucky I love you." "I am," Henry agreed, his voice becoming serious. "I am so lucky, Clara. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you answered that advertisement, that you had the courage to come all this way, that you chose to stay even when you could have left." "I chose you," Clara corrected gently. I chose us, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Henry's hard work and increasing expertise, combined with Clara's practical management and additional income streams, allowed them to expand gradually. They bought more land, increased their herd, hired an additional hand to help Joe, who was getting older and appreciated the assistance. Robert grew into a bright, energetic child who loved the ranch and everything about it. He learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and he followed his father and Joe around constantly, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and everything else. When Robert was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous, having been through it before. Their daughter, Alice, was born in the spring, a tiny thing with Clara's dark eyes and a surprisingly loud voice for such a small baby. Robert was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to changing diapers. Clara had to constantly remind him to be gentle, but she loved seeing the bond forming between her children. 2 children, Henry marveled one evening, holding Alice while Robert sat at his feet playing with toy horses. We have 2 children, Clara, a family. We had a family before, Clara pointed out, but yes, this is pretty wonderful. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch work was still demanding, but it was familiar now. Clara had her household routines, her cooking and sewing and managing of the household budget. She had also started teaching Robert his letters and numbers, determined that her children would have the education she had to fight for. In town, Clara had become an accepted and respected member of the community. People knew her as Henry Everett's wife, yes, but also as Clara in her own right. She helped Mrs. Palmer with community events, contributed to the new schoolhouse fund, and was always ready to help a neighbor in need. One day, about 5 years after she had first arrived in Jerome Junction, Clara was in town buying supplies when she overheard 2 women talking. "Did you hear that the Everetts paid off their ranch completely?" one woman said. "Free and clear, they own all that land now." And Henry Everett started out knowing nothing about ranching. It just goes to show what hard work can do. And having a good woman beside you, the other woman added. Clara Everett is smart as a whip. She has been teaching the children at her place, did you know? Little Robert can read better than some 10-year-olds, and him only 5. Clara smiled to herself as she moved away. They had paid off the ranch finally. Every debt cleared, the land truly theirs. It had taken years of hard work and careful saving, but they had done it. When she got home and told Henry, he swept her up and spun her around, laughing. "We did it, Clara, we actually did it. The ranch is ours. It always was ours," Clara said, but she was laughing too. "But yes, it is nice to have the papers to prove it." That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Henry sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The house had been expanded over the years, with an additional bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen. The barn had been rebuilt, stronger and larger than before. The land itself had been improved with careful management and hard work. "You remember that first day?" Henry asked quietly, "when you stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified?" "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "I thought you were going to send me right back when I told you I could not cook or sew." "Best thing you ever told me," Henry said. "Because it meant we started this marriage with honesty. No pretending, no false expectations. Just 2 people figuring things out together." "Just 2 people," Clara echoed. "Who somehow built all this?" She gestured at the ranch spread out before them, the house and barn and corrals, the cattle grazing in the distance, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. "Together," Henry added, taking her hand. "We built it together. That is the important part," More years passed, bringing both joys and challenges. When Robert was 7 and Alice was 4, Clara gave birth to twins, boys they named Thomas and James. The house suddenly felt much smaller and much louder, but Clara would not have changed it for anything. Joe retired from active ranch work, but stayed on in a small cabin Henry built for him, helping with light tasks and teaching the children everything he knew about ranching. A younger man, Daniel, was hired to take over Joe's heavier duties, and he proved to be a quick learner and hard worker. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Henry had developed a reputation for raising quality cattle, and he could command good prices at market. Clara had started a small vegetable garden that had expanded year by year until she was selling produce in town regularly. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Robert, as he grew older, showed a real aptitude for ranching. He loved working with the cattle, loved the land, loved everything about the ranch life. Alice, on the other hand, was more interested in books and learning, and Clara spent hours teaching her everything she could, knowing that her daughter might want a different life someday, and that was all right too. The twins were still young enough that their personalities were just developing, but Thomas seemed to take after Alice with his quiet, thoughtful nature, while James was all energy and mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry surprised Clara with a trip to Phoenix, leaving the children with Mrs. Palmer, who had become like a grandmother to them. It was the first time Clara and Henry had been alone together, truly alone, since before Robert was born. 10 years, Clara said as they sat in a hotel dining room, a luxury they rarely experienced. Can you believe it has been 10 years? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Henry said. Other times it feels like you have always been with me, like I cannot remember what life was like before you. Better or worse than you expected when you placed that advertisement? Clara asked, smiling. So much better, Henry said without hesitation. Clara, you have given me everything I did not even know I wanted. A real home, a family, a partnership. You challenged me to be better than I thought I could be, and you never let me give up on myself. You did the same for me, Clara said softly. When I came here, I was running away from a life I did not want, but I was not running toward anything. I had no real hope for the future. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to learn, to grow, to become more than I thought I could be. Henry reached across the table and took her hand. Here is to the next 10 years and the 10 after that and all the years beyond. I love you, Clara Everett, more than I can say. I love you too, Clara said, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you for being exactly who you are and for letting me be exactly who I am. They returned to the ranch refreshed and ready to dive back into the beautiful chaos of their life. The children had behaved well for Mrs. Palmer, though James had apparently tried to ride one of the chickens, resulting in feathers everywhere and a thoroughly indignant hen. As the years continued to pass, Clara and Henry watched their children grow. Robert, at 15, was working the ranch alongside his father and Daniel, already as tall as Henry and showing every sign of becoming a fine rancher. Alice, at 12, had read every book Clara could get her hands on and was talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. The twins, at 8, were best friends and worst enemies by turns, keeping the household lively. Joe passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, and the whole family mourned him. He had been such an integral part of their lives, teaching Henry everything he knew, bouncing the children on his knee and telling them stories. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, Joe Miller, friend and teacher. He would have been proud of what we have built here, Henry said as they stood at the graveside. He saw the potential before I did. He believed in us, Clara agreed. "He believed in you when you were just a city clerk who did not know a cow from a calf. That meant something." Life continued its forward march. Robert, at 18, announced he wanted to expand the ranch's operations, try breeding horses as well as cattle. Henry, remembering how Joe had encouraged his own learning, gave his son the freedom to try, helping where he could but letting Robert make his own decisions and his own mistakes. Alice, at 15, began teaching at the new school in Jerome Junction 2 days a week, assisting the main teacher and discovering she loved it. Clara could see her daughter's future taking shape, and she was proud. The twins, now 11, were still full of energy but starting to show their own individual interests. Thomas liked working with his hands, fixing things and building things, while James showed an unexpected talent for working with horses. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Clara and Henry sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. But this time, their children and grandchildren were around them. Robert had married a local girl named Sarah 2 years earlier, and they had a baby daughter named Clara after her grandmother. The sight of her granddaughter, gurgling happily in her mother's arms, filled Clara with joy. 20 years, Henry said, shaking his head in wonder. How did 20 years pass so quickly? I have no idea, Clara said. But what a 20 years it has been. She thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1882, clutching her carpetbag and terrified of the future. She could barely recognize herself in that girl now. The woman Clara had become was confident, capable, surrounded by love and family and purpose. "Any regrets?" Henry asked softly. Clara looked at him, at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. His hair had silver at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the desert sun. But he was still the same Henry who had laughed when she confessed she could not cook, who had said, "Good, neither can I," and changed the entire course of her life. "Not a single one," Clara said firmly. "Not one regret, Henry. You—" "Never," Henry said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made was placing that advertisement. Second best was marrying you even though you could not cook or sew." "And now I can do both," Clara pointed out, laughing, "though it took me long enough to learn." "But we learned together," Henry said. "That was always the important part, together." Clara watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Around them, their children laughed and talked, making plans for tomorrow, for next week, for the future. The ranch that they had built together, that had almost broken them a dozen times but never quite succeeded, stretched out before them, thriving and strong. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had never known she wanted until Henry gave her the chance to build it alongside him. From desperate lies to profound truth, from incompetence to capability, from strangers to partners to lovers, they had traveled the distance together. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara leaned against her husband, her partner, her love, and knew that every step of the journey had been worth it. They had taken their mutual inability to meet traditional expectations and turned it into their greatest strength. They had built a life not on what they were supposed to be, but on who they actually were, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a book. Clara's days were still filled with purpose and love. More grandchildren arrived. Alice eventually married a teacher from Phoenix and moved to the city, though she visited often, bringing her own children to experience the ranch where she had grown up. The twins both stayed on the ranch, Thomas focusing on the building and maintenance side while James developed the horse breeding operation that Robert had started. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than the financial success, what mattered to Clara and Henry was the legacy they were creating. Their children and grandchildren were learning the same lessons they had learned. That hard work mattered, that honesty mattered, that partnership and love could overcome almost any obstacle. On their 30th anniversary, now in their 50s, Clara and Henry took another trip, this time bringing their grandchildren to see the places where they had come from. They traveled to St. Louis so Henry could show them where he had grown up, and then to Boston, so Clara could show them the cramped apartment where she had lived with her father. "It is so small," young Clara said, looking at the building that still stood, though different people lived there now. "How did you live here, Grandma?" "You make do with what you have," Clara said, "and you hope for something better. When your grandfather's advertisement gave me a chance at something better, I took it, even though I was terrified." "Was it hard, going so far away to marry someone you had never met?" Alice's eldest daughter, Emma, asked. "It was the hardest and scariest thing I had ever done," Clara admitted, "but also the best thing. Sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most wonderful outcomes." They returned to Arizona, to the ranch, to the life they had built. Clara had started slowing down a bit, letting the younger generation take on more of the work, but she was still actively involved in the ranch management. Henry, too, had stepped back from the daily operations, but he loved teaching his grandchildren everything he had learned about ranching. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching yet another sunset, Henry turned to Clara with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember when you told me you could not cook or sew?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Clara said, smiling. "I was sure you were going to send me away." "And I told you good, neither could I," Henry continued. "At the time, I just said it because it was true, and because I did not see the point in both of us pretending to be something we were not. But looking back now, I realize that moment set the tone for everything that came after." "How so?" Clara asked, though she thought she knew what he meant. "It meant we started our marriage with radical honesty," Henry explained. "We saw each other's flaws and inadequacies right from the beginning, and we chose each other anyway. We did not have illusions to be shattered later. We just had reality, and we faced it together." "And we learned together," Clara added. "We taught each other. We grew together. Neither of us stayed the same person we were when we started." "Exactly," Henry said. "We became partners in the truest sense. I think that is rarer than people realize, Clara." "How many couples truly see each other as equals, as partners who support and challenge and grow together?" "Not enough," Clara said softly. "I have been very lucky, Henry. Lucky that you saw me as a partner from the beginning. Lucky that you never expected me to be something I was not. Lucky that you grew alongside me instead of expecting me to just conform to what a wife was supposed to be." "I am the lucky one," Henry insisted. "You took a chance on a man who had no idea what he was doing, and you stuck with me through every failure and struggle. You made me believe I could be more than I thought I was." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. The ranch was quiet now, the children and grandchildren having gone to their own homes for the evening. It was just the two of them, as it had been so many evenings over the years. "You ever think about what advice you would give to young couples just starting out?" Clara asked. "All the time," Henry admitted. "Especially now that the grandchildren are getting to the age where they will start thinking about marriage. What would you say?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I think I would tell them not to be afraid of being honest about who they really are, flaws and all. I would tell them that a partnership built on honesty and mutual respect is worth more than one built on meeting expectations. And I would tell them that learning and growing together is part of the adventure, not something to be avoided." I would add that love is not just a feeling, Henry said. It is a choice you make every single day. Some days it is easy, and some days it is hard, but you keep choosing each other anyway. That is what makes a marriage last. Wise words from a man who started out with no idea how to be a husband, Clara teased gently. I had a good teacher, Henry said, pulling her close. The best partner anyone could ask for. As they grew older, Clara and Henry gradually transitioned from active management of the ranch to advisors and beloved grandparents. Robert and his brothers ran the day-to-day operations now, making decisions and handling problems, though they still came to Clara and Henry for advice and guidance. The ranch had expanded significantly over the years. What had started as 80 head of cattle and a struggling operation was now a thriving enterprise with hundreds of cattle, a successful horse breeding program, and diversified income streams. But more than the material success, what mattered was that they had created something lasting, something that would continue beyond them. Clara, now in her 60s, had taken to writing down their story, not for publication but for their descendants. She wanted them to know how it had all started, with lies and fear and two people who did not know what they were doing. She wanted them to understand that success was not about starting with all the right skills or knowledge, but about being willing to learn and grow and face challenges together. Henry, reading over what she had written one evening, smiled and added his own notes in the margins, his perspective on events they had lived through together. It became a joint project, their legacy spelled out in ink and paper. I hope they appreciate it, Clara said. I hope they understand what we were trying to tell them. They will, Henry assured her. Maybe not right away, but someday when they face their own challenges, they will remember that their grandmother could not cook and their grandfather could not ranch, and somehow they still built all this. And it will give them courage to face their own impossibilities. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. 3 generations who owed their existence to a desperate woman in Boston and a lonely man in Arizona who had taken a chance on each other. Robert stood to give a toast, raising his glass. To my parents, who taught us that honesty matters more than perfection, that partnership is more important than traditional roles, and that love and hard work can overcome any obstacle. Thank you for building this life, this home, this family. Thank you for showing us what a real marriage looks like. Clara felt tears on her cheeks as she looked around at everyone gathered there. This was her legacy. All these people who existed because she had found the courage to step off that stagecoach 40 years ago. Because Henry had laughed instead of being angry when she confessed her lies. Because they had chosen honesty and partnership over pretense and expectation. To 40 more years, Henry said softly, raising his own glass to her. To forever, Clara corrected, because she knew that what they had built would last beyond their own lifetimes, carried forward by their children and their children's children. The party lasted long into the evening, with music and dancing and stories shared around a bonfire. Clara watched her family, all the lives touched by the choices she and Henry had made, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, but genuine love and connection. Not meeting expectations, but exceeding them in unexpected ways. When the evening finally wound down and most of the family had left or gone to bed, Clara and Henry found themselves once again on their porch, watching the stars appear in the vast Arizona sky. The desert night was cool and clear, and the sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep surrounded them. 40 years, Henry marveled. Sometimes it feels impossible that so much time has passed. Good years, though, Clara said. Hard years sometimes, but good ones. The best, Henry agreed. Clara, I want you to know something. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment. Every challenge, every struggle, every joy, I would choose it all again because it led us here. Even the burned stew, Clara asked, unable to resist teasing him even now. Especially the burned stew, Henry said, laughing. That taught us both that we had a lot to learn and we were willing to learn it together. Some of my favorite memories are of us in that kitchen. You with your cookbook trying to figure out recipes, me attempting to mend shirts and just making a mess of it. We were so hopeless at so many things. But we figured it out, Clara said. That is what matters. We figured it out together. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, two people who had grown old together, who had built a life from nothing but determination and love. The ranch that had seemed like such an impossible challenge 40 years ago now felt like home in the deepest sense of the word. Do you think we did all right? Clara asked quietly. With the children, with the ranch, with everything. I think we did more than all right, Henry said firmly. Look at what we created, Clara. Not just the ranch, though that is impressive, but our family. The values we instilled in our children. The legacy we are leaving. We showed them that honesty matters, that hard work pays off, that love is stronger than fear. I think we did very, very all right. Clara squeezed his hand, grateful for his words, for his presence, for the 40 years they had shared. I love you, Henry Everett. Thank you for being my partner in all things. I love you too, Clara Everett, Henry said. Thank you for taking a chance on a man who did not know what he was doing. Thank you for building this life with me. As they sat there under the stars, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first terrified confession on her arrival, through years of learning and growing and building, to this peaceful evening surrounded by the fruits of their labor. It had been an extraordinary life. Not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it was real and shared and full of love. The ranch would continue after they were gone, she knew. Their children and grandchildren would carry it forward, building on the foundation that she and Henry had laid. They would face their own challenges, make their own mistakes, and hopefully find their own joy in overcoming obstacles together. But right now, in this moment, Clara was content to simply sit with her husband, her partner, her love, and appreciate everything they had accomplished. From two people who could not cook or sew or ranch, they had built an empire of love and family and success. They had proved that starting without the right skills was not a barrier to achievement, as long as you had honesty, determination, and someone to share the journey with. Look, Henry said softly, pointing to the sky. A shooting star. Clara watched the bright streak cross the heavens and disappear. Did you make a wish? I do not need to, Henry said. Everything I could wish for, I already have. Clara smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. She did not need to make a wish either. Her life had turned out better than any wish could have made it. She had found home, not in a place, but in partnership with this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to love her anyway. The years continued to be kind to them, bringing more grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. Clara and Henry remained active in the ranch's affairs, though more as advisors than workers. They had earned their rest, though neither was content to simply sit idle. There was always something to do, someone to teach, a grandchild who needed wisdom or just a listening ear. When Clara was 70 and Henry 71, they decided to take one more trip, a pilgrimage back to Jerome Junction to see how the town had changed. It had grown significantly since that day Clara had first arrived, now boasting proper schools, several churches, even a small hospital. But the boarding house where she had stayed still stood, though Mrs. Palmer had long since passed away. They walked down the main street, pointing out places they remembered, laughing at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. At the church where they had married, they stood for a moment in silence, remembering that day 50 years ago when they had promised to love each other. "We kept our promises," Henry said softly. "Both of us." "We did," Clara agreed. "And we made new ones along the way, to keep learning, keep growing, keep choosing each other." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land they had worked and loved for 5 decades. The house, expanded and improved over the years, glowed warm in the evening light. Smoke rose from the chimney, evidence of dinner being prepared by one of their daughters-in-law. "Home," Henry said with satisfaction as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "Home," Clara echoed, and the word encompassed everything. Not just the physical structure, but the life they had built within it, the family they had raised, the love they had nurtured for 50 years. That evening, the family gathered for dinner as they often did. The table, which had been built extra long to accommodate everyone, was crowded with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The noise level was tremendous, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, children laughing and occasionally arguing, the sounds of a large, healthy, happy family. Clara looked down the table at Henry, and he caught her eye and smiled. This was what they had built. Not perfection, but something better, something real and lasting and full of love. After dinner, when the younger children had been put to bed and the adults were sitting around talking, Robert asked his parents to tell the story again. The story of how they had met, how they had started out, how they had built the ranch from almost nothing. "We have heard it a dozen times," Alice said, but she was smiling. "But it never gets old." So Clara and Henry, passing the narrative back and forth as they always did, told the story one more time. About a desperate woman in Boston who lied in her letters. About a lonely man in Arizona who was honest about his own inadequacies. About 2 people who started a marriage by admitting they could not cook or sew or ranch, and decided to learn together. "The important thing," Henry said, concluding the story, "is not what you do not know. It is what you are willing to learn, and who you are willing to learn with." "Your grandfather taught me that," Clara added. "When I confessed I had lied about being able to cook and sew, I expected anger. Instead, I got honesty and partnership. That set the tone for everything that followed." "So what you are saying," one of the grandchildren said thoughtfully, "is that it is better to be honest about your weaknesses than to pretend you are something you are not." "Exactly," Clara said. "Because pretending never works long term, but honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, builds trust. And trust is the foundation of any real partnership." The family eventually dispersed, heading to their various homes or to the guest rooms in the big house. Clara and Henry went to their own room, the one they had shared for 50 years, and got ready for bed with the comfortable routine of long practice. "You think they really understand?" Clara asked as she climbed into bed. "The lesson we have been trying to teach them." "They understand enough," Henry said, joining her. "And what they do not understand now they will learn with time and experience, just like we did." He pulled her close, and Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This man, who had seen past her lies to the frightened woman beneath, who had chosen to build a partnership instead of a traditional marriage, who had learned and grown alongside her for 5 decades. He was her home, her anchor, her love. "Henry." "Yes, my love. Thank you," Clara said simply. "For everything. For laughing when you could have been angry. For being honest when you could have pretended. For choosing me every day for 50 years. "The pleasure has been all mine," Henry said softly. You gave me a life I never knew I wanted, Clara. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You taught me that I could be more than I thought I was. How could I not choose you every single day?" They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had built a life on honesty and partnership and love. Outside, the Arizona night was vast and starlit, the desert cooling after the heat of the day. The ranch slept around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what determination and love could accomplish. Clara Jensen Everett, who had arrived in Jerome Junction terrified and desperate, had found everything she had been looking for and so much more. Henry Everett, who had been a struggling rancher drowning in inadequacy, had found a partner who believed in him and pushed him to be better. Together, they had built an empire, not of wealth or power, but of love and family and legacy. They had proved that starting without the right skills was not a barrier, as long as you had the right partner. They had shown that honesty was more valuable than perfection, that partnership mattered more than traditional roles, that love and hard work could overcome almost any obstacle. And as they slept, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, their story became part of the fabric of the ranch itself. A story that would be told and retold, generation after generation, about two people who did not know how to cook or sew or ranch, but who learned together and built something extraordinary from their shared inadequacies and their fierce determination to make their partnership work. The tale of Clara and Henry Everett, who started their marriage with radical honesty and built it on unwavering partnership, would echo down through the years, inspiring their descendants to face their own challenges with courage and to always choose honesty and partnership over pretense and expectation. And that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all.